Did you know that the United States produces 13 million barrels of crude oil every day? Enough to fill 800 Olympic swimming pools. Oil and natural gas are refined into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, and used to make unexpected everyday essentials like shoes, cell phones, even life-saving medicines. People rely on oil and gas and on Energy Transfer to safely deliver it through an underground system of pipelines across the country. Learn more at energytransfer.com.
Class is now in session, and the UPS Store is here to help you ace arriving on campus. Our certified packing experts can pack everything you need, from desktops to decor. Plus, when you pack and ship with us, you get our exclusive pack and ship guarantee. Your items arrive safe or your money back. Restrictions and limitations apply. To get a 20% off packing coupon and for full details, visit the upsstore.com/packing.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast, and I'm very, very honoured today to be joined by Barney White-Spunner. We're talking about his new book today, Nations in Arms, 5 Armies That Made Europe. I've been reading excerpts from the book. It is a fascinating read, and it's a kind of an exploration from ancient to modern history. And about the kind of the wider kind of political and social, I guess, consequences of the mobilization of armies beyond simply just the battlefield, but obviously that is a key part of it as well. And it kind of looks at armies as a sort of historical phenomena. We have these things which, every country in the world, bar a couple, has one, and yet we don't see them very often as distinct historical creations, which indeed they are. But anyway, I haven't written the book. Barney has, and he's here to talk about it. But firstly, Barney, welcome. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you. Very nice with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. So, firstly, I mean, it's such a kind of a sort of a long sweep through time. There are 5 armies. Obviously, there would have been countless to choose from. Yeah. The armies that you chose, from Constantine all the way through to the US Army in 1941. Yeah. What motive? Why those choices?
Because they were successful, not just on the battlefield, but they were successful in how they defended the interests of societies who spawned them. They were armies who were created largely in reaction to, if not a crisis, although 3 of them were. You could argue 1941 was a crisis for the US. Certainly was for Prussia after Jena, and it certainly was for Cromwell, or the Parliamentary Army in the UK, the British Isles as it then was. You could argue that the other 2 armies I've taken, being Mehmet the Conquerors and Constantine the Great, were because they needed them to fulfill a sort of great movement, which I think they both envisaged, but they needed an army to do it. But the real reason is that what I want to do is what I'm trying to do in the book is explore new ideas, because all these armies were created, were faced, so the crisis with a major issue. And they thought through from first principles what their army was. They didn't just sort of take the existing model and say we'll spend a bit more on this, a bit more on that. They actually went back to the basics, and they actually constructed armies. And they're also armies that have lasted. So if you look at Constantine the Great's army, you could, okay, this Byzantine historians will argue with me, but basically it lasts on and off for up until the fall of Constantinople.
Mhm.
Mehmet the Conqueror's Ottoman army actually lasts arguably up until the end of the First World War. Yeah, it diminishes hugely in effectiveness. The army that Cromwell created is the modern British Army. I commanded the modern British Army, so I know a little bit about it. And my own regiment was founded as part of that process. And the British Army today is, whether you like it or not, very largely based on that model.
Right.
The Prussian Army, again, okay, the Prussian Army gets it gets like diverted by the fact that Bismarck and the Kaisers play with the political control, so that the model on which that Prussian army, founded by Scharnhorst after Jena, is built is perverted, if you like. But actually, that army lasts right up until 1945.
Yeah.
And again, you look at the US Army, in 1941. I mean, now arguably the US Army between 41 and 44 is one of it's almost the sort of the greatest story of them all. If you look at what was created, a U.S. army that was, I think, ranked 17th, 18th in the world in 1941, somewhere after Portugal, I think. But in 3 years, that's fielding over 60 divisions in Europe and over 20 in the Pacific. I mean, it's just an incredible story. And you look at the U.S. Army today. The U.S. Army today is that army. Okay, it's different, it's smaller, but the structure is the same, and the care for soldiers and the procurement decisions are the same. So that's why. And people say to me, why didn't I take Napoleon's army? Well, for the very good reason that Napoleon's army, fantastically tactically successful, one of the most innovative, effective battlefield armies probably ever. But look at France after Napoleon's defeat. Look at France after Waterloo. Look at France from that 1815, arguably right up until 1945. What has that done to France? What's that army done for its country? It's done quite a lot for Napoleon's reputation, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. But I mean, it's the hubris of one man. It's not an army that identifies with a nation. And as we face these myriad threats, which we do at the moment, which are part conventional, we live poor old Ukraine, see what they're going through. The world is unstable days. But also society faces lots of other threats,
Hmm.
which it's got no way necessarily of combating. I've just been listening to the news, I'm sure you have, about the tsunami. You've got natural disasters, you've got pandemics, which we didn't think we'd have to deal with. You've got a huge migration crisis looming, whether we like it or not. You've got all sorts of other issues which you're going to need some sort of force to deal with.
Yeah.
And the answer to me is not just say, oh, well, we'll just divert the army, because actually you've got the army to do what an army's meant to do, which is defend the nation. So it's a time, I think we're at a time when we need to rethink through actually what armies are. I'm sorry, I'm banging on too much.
Oh, please, no, this is, no, I mean, there was, I think that there's some very interesting things to say about the example of America in 1941.
Yeah.
And the kind of the relationship between the idea of citizenry and the army. The idea of being a national citizen, you have some sort of relationship with the state you live in, some kind of sense of obligation. And obviously America's not alone in having that. There are, the ability to raise huge armies is, you can't do it through coercion. Even the Soviet Union couldn't raise those sorts of numbers completely through coercion. There had to be people who were thinking, yes, I will take my rifle and go and fight the Germans.
Yeah.
But I think there's something really interesting. You talked about this a phenomenal success story, from having virtually nothing in, say, 1941 to 60 divisions in Europe. And also, I read a really interesting book about the Casablanca Conference.
Yeah.
And there's a Casablanca is an interesting tipping point with the American sort of chiefs of staff, who at that point, kind of up until that point, sort of tended to follow the British lead. And they thought, well, they've been doing the fighting, they know about this. And then it seems like there's a moment where America, the American chiefs of staff come at it with almost like beginner's mind and think, how, as you said, how do we win wars? Basically, base principles. And then there's they become, obviously shortly after Casablanca, they're kind of the senior partner in the relationship.
Yeah.
Does that kind of chime with how you?
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, I think what America becomes, America actually, has supported Britain, let's say, a lot before 41. And Lend-Lease, I mean, in Churchill's famous words, one of the most unsordid acts ever. There has been a huge amount. That did also benefit America because we are coming, it hits America at the time of the end of the Depression. There's a lot of spare capacity and unemployment in the States. But the Lend-Lease was a brave bit of politics. So, there is activity before then. And I think the Americans have been looking quite critically at the British war effort before, but it's not really until they start to put their own army ready together, but I think they begin to feel that they can call the shots. Of course, the debate really, brilliantly explored by Andrew Roberts. I don't know whether you've interviewed Andrew, but on his Masters and Commanders, which is the most excellent book on this. But basically what it does is actually analyze that argument between Washington and London as to what should become first. Should it be Japan first? It's after all Japan's attacked the United States, in Hawaii, or Germany. Okay, in the end there was a convergence of interests on defeating Germany first. But when you do it, and there is very strong arguments from Roosevelt and Marshall that actually you should get on with it and you should do it much earlier than actually June 44 when it finally happens.
Yeah.
Brits arguing that you can't actually mount a cross-channel invasion before then. And actually Churchill is right. I mean, I think it would have been chaotic. And the point of the torch landings in North Africa of Sicily is actually there, if you like, we learn a lot of lessons for D-Day.
Mm-hmm.
And D-Day works, but, D-Day might not have worked. So, interestingly, although the Americans are very strong, they do actually go along with the Brit line, but rarely from before D-Day with Eisenhower Supreme Commander. The Americans are providing the money; they're providing the machines. And as I put in the book, Stalin says America is a country, USA is a country of machines. So the USA is producing, I can't remember the figure actually exactly, but looking it up, I put in the book, the amount of materiel that the US produces basically equips the Allies, Russians and everyone else. So there is a huge material advantage, a huge advantage in terms of men. There is a freshness to the American approach. Yeah, we don't always get it right, but then Brits don't always get it right either. And then you get sort of in Normandy, or after Normandy, between June 44 and May 45, you get this sort of rather unwelcome tension, personified on the British side by Montgomery, who I think most of us who've been in senior positions in the army afterwards now think was, out of place, and Bradley and Eisenhower trying Eisenhower's patience, and Montgomery sort of convinced that he should really be the Supreme Commander. It should be him who leads and doesn't think Eisenhower's up to it, but actually Eisenhower is a supremo because America is the leading power, and actually arguably people like me would look at Eisenhower and think he did a fantastic job. So yeah, I mean, I think you identify something it terribly interesting. One of the things which I haven't dealt on the book, which I maybe hopefully in the future book, is in senior command, one of the most important things is that senior commanders part of their job is to get on with each other.
Yeah,
there's no room in a military operation for standoffs, and that's exactly what happens between Montgomery and Bradley, Montgomery and Eisenhower. Yeah. And that is what Eisenhower in the end managed to diffuse. But too many operations have sort of gone wrong because of disagreements. So I certainly got off your question, but I mean I think that illustrates the answer.
If you go back one step, historically through the book to look at Jena, and the kind of, I guess it's a sort of Jena is the thing that creates sort of Prussian militarism in the 19th century, and the idea of the general staff, I mean, my reading of the situation with the German general staff was that the ability to delegate downwards was one of their key skills. I think Auftragstaktik is the
Auftragstaktik,
and that meant you had innovative decision makers at sort of kind of like divisional level who just said, roughly the job is to take, say, Liège, and here's sort of I'll respond to the facts on the ground. It's interesting that there's a moment between sort of Stalin and Hitler in about 1941 when Stalin finally kind of learns that lesson and says, right, well, I'm going to let Zhukov and people like that
Yeah,
do what they need to do. But Hitler
yeah,
actually undoes the
yeah.
things that had made German militarism and Prussian militarism successful in the first place by
Mm,
ripping up Auftrag's tactic. And, I
mm.
think there's a great, in Richard J. Evans' book, The Third Reich at War, he's got this
Yes.
great anecdote of a
Yeah,
fairly mid-level German officer in a command center in Russia getting a phone call, and it's Hitler
yeah,
saying, well, what's going on? What are you doing?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. So yeah, you make a very, very good point. I mean, let me just answer the first part and come back and say, well, in the first part, there is that tradition that's why Scharnhorst is, and the if you like, the military revolution in Prussia after 1806 is so important, because there is an old Prussian tradition going way back to the Great Elector 17th century that actually had fostered that idea of Auftrag tactique, and was that wonderful battle against the Swedes, the Great Sleigh Ride, led by the Great Elector, one of those neglected and absolutely fascinating bits of European history. That sort of idea of sort of individuality and devolving responsibility is slightly lost under Frederick William and Frederick the Great, Frederick William the First and Frederick the Great, whereby you get this sort of almost sort of mechanical, massive machine. And Frederick the Great is not one to encourage initiative. So in a way, losing that, I think, is one of the arguments that when people like Scharnhorst and Clausewitz and
mm,
Gneisenau are looking at, where allies has gone wrong, and that is one of the reasons they want to build it back in. But you are completely right that actually, whereas the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, rarely encouraged that, and you look at some of the German operators, I was comparing this German operation orders at Arnhem the other day. I commanded airborne forces, so I'm fairly familiar with Arnhem. Compared to what the Brits issue. The Brits issue pages and pages with sort of endless grid references and coordination detail, whereas the German sort of orders are, this is what you're going to do, this is what you've got to do here, the resources, do it with them. So, and I think, again, if you look at the German army's performance in the last war, actually Hitler's interference means they never really successfully conclude a campaign. I actually write in the book, the German army never actually won a campaign, and people have criticized me for saying that, but it's actually true. You could argue France is arguably an exception to that, but everywhere else, actually, political interference,
mhm,
not totally political interference, but largely, and the reason you've just explained is part of it. It stops that, and certainly Dunkirk. Would Dunkirk have been successful from a Brit point of view if the Wehrmacht had been allowed to get on with it? Would D-Day have worked if Rommel and von Rundstedt had been allowed to actually orchestrate the troops as they wanted to? So yeah, and that's a fascinating point, and that's part of the reason why that Prussian model is so important and why I wanted to explore it. But what's really interesting to me is actually the British Army, having been very sort of hidebound and detailed, and particularly I suppose that having dealt with two large conscript armies, actually has now come way back to that sort of outdoor tactique
yeah,
approach.
yeah. And I mean, I think that there's something kind of um, central to kind of fascism itself that produces those sorts of um, those sorts of conditions where you
Yeah.
have the idea of the inspired leader. I mean, that's
Mm.
a kind of that's where sort of fascism differs from all other forms of kind of authoritarianism. You have this idea of the kind of the magical, flawless leader that understands the will of the nation. Um, and this is where Hitler is able to create this role for himself, and he, believes his own bullshit after the fall of France as well. You see him becoming from the start of his dictatorship in the early 1930s of being a relatively cautious dictator, let's take things slowly, to being
Mm.
increasingly throughout the war years a gambler, certain of his own kind of his own rightness, and of
Yeah.
course. Any vaguely sensible person knows that you have, wars operate in the other way. You have to be kind of skeptical of your own, your own
Yeah.
inspired decision making, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would just sort of kind of that's because it's interesting how that changes over history. Because when we look at Constantine, who arguably is probably one of the most influential Europeans of all time, apart from the fact he's one of the most quoted men of all time. He's allegedly the author of the Nicene Creed, the Christian Nicene Creed.
Mhm.
Actually, there is absolute military and political control together. And again, you get the same with Mehmed the Conqueror and with subsequent Ottoman sultans. So when you've got complete military and political, that sort of complete authority can work. But again, it only works because they surround themselves with a coterie of people who they trust, who they then give delegated responsibility to.
Yeah,
But the problems come when you have that split between political and military in terms of location, in terms of function. And that is, of course, exactly what the Prussians and the Russians, I mean, confronted. And of course, if you're Hitler or Stalin, as you so correctly say, so much of your sort of personality cult is tied up with you being the great military commander. I mean, as Marshal Stalin,
hmm
yeah, what does actually had the Marshal ever rarely commanded,
yeah,
apart from the odd death squad? And what had Hitler actually ever maybe been an effective corporal? But I mean, the Wehrmacht would call him rather dismissively the
yeah,
Bavarian corporal.
yeah,
But again, it's quite about again part of the reason why I want to take those early armies too. So I think it's important how we see this derive over history. And again, Cromwell is, and that example, Cromwell's up. The example of the British Army under Cromwell is, well, they're all fascinating examples, but it's that again is where you have somebody who starts in sort of complete
mm,
contention with political authority and then becomes political authority himself. So I mean, when Cromwell died, he's actually been in complete military and political control of the British Isles for 5 years, and probably arguably longer.
With looking at the new model army.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, the new model army in some ways is a revolutionary army. In some ways, and the reason I say that is because there is a moment in 1644 where essentially radical parliamentarians say, "Why do we keep coming to a draw with the king? Why are we not winning?" And
exactly. Yeah.
the theory is, well, it's led, the Lords Essex and
Mm,
Manchester are running things, and they are running things to a draw because what they don't really want to defeat the king. They want to make the king reasonable. Um, to which the kind of the response is, well, no, we need a winning machine.
yeah.
And that's an example again, I think, of thinking about an army from the ground up, isn't it?
Totally. And that's why it's such a hugely, I mean, I just could hang on for hours about this. It's so interesting. So, but you're spot on. Yeah. I mean, I think the feeling was amongst the more radical MPs, the Manchester and Essex weren't there, they weren't out necessarily to win the war, as you say, they were there to do a deal. Whereas the more radical element, of whom personified by Cromwell, and to a lesser extent by Fairfax, actually, wanted they were for all-out war and wanted to win, and as indeed they did.
Hmm
But that is absolutely true. But what is so fascinating about that is how that new model army, which is designed as a weapon to defeat the king, then becomes sort of so politicized in its own right. And you get
Yeah,
this really quite extraordinary development between an army that's created in 1944, which was in 4 years, it's actually holding convention saying it wants universal suffrage.
yeah,
I mean, this is just extraordinary. And again, part of the reason I wanted to include that, you do see there's a lot of talk at the moment about democracy. Is democracy the right form of government? Should we stick with democracy? And you get these terrifying polls. I don't know actually how much paid them, saying something like sort of 30% of young Europeans think we should live under sort of dictatorships. And arguably, this is the post-communist generation who've never done that. But one of the reasons I want to include that is if you look at New Model, it actually demonstrates graphically why an army has to be part of a nation, why it
Yeah,
has to go with the nation, and obey whatever whoever the authority is. It might be an emperor, it might be a sultan, it might be a parliament, it might be a Prussian king, it might be the U.S. Congress or US president in Congress. So, and part of the reason for dwelling on that bit so much is to try and make the point now that however dire the world is, we don't want societies run by armies. Armies do not run societies well. They're not. I mean, one of the most disastrous periods in British history is what's known as the rule of the major generals, whereby
yeah,
Cromwell sends out generals to run the British counties. It's a disaster area and becomes a joke. The soldiers are there to do what the government, the elected or appointed or God-given, whatever, but what the government wants them to do. And it's such an important lesson, and that's why I dwelt on it in such detail.
yeah. And it's interesting. You talk about there's that revolutionary moment of the Putney debates,
Yeah,
where the army after the war feels it's been treated very badly. There are questions about pensions and money for widows and
yeah,
indemnity for
mm,
certain rather unpleasant things new model soldiers will have
yeah,
done during the war, and not being sent to Ireland
yeah,
to
exactly. Yeah,
and so there are all these and yet
mm,
this coalesces into this extraordinary, one of the key moments in the development of mass suffrage. It doesn't happen, obviously, but it's a key stepping stone towards mass suffrage and kind of a mature democracy in the British Isles. But Cromwell, I mean, Cromwell is not a revolutionary.
no, yeah,
Cromwell is a godly man.
yeah,
Cromwell believes in a reformed church, but he's not a radical, and basically puts
mm,
it basically sort of squashes it.
yeah,
And so this army that is of the people, that is being
mm,
its radicalism has been used to win the war, eventually has to be kind of decapitated
yeah.
after the war. um
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Grab a cold drink at a hot price, like a refreshing Coke Zero or sweet tea in any size for only $1.49. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Life is a workout, and Smoothie King is here to help you power through. Whether you're grinding out bicep curls or muscling the couch across the living room, crushing morning miles, or sprinting through back-to-back meetings, Smoothie King has fuel to help you maximize your workouts, own your recovery, and elevate your game. Give your body the energy, protein, and power it needs with a lineup of delicious smoothies made to help you conquer your goals. Only at Smoothie King.
for reasons of state.
Totally. And you're also right, the Putney debates they're one of the most extraordinary episodes and they're well worth reading for your listeners if you haven't read them. And there's a very good little book. It's in my bibliography. Read them in full. When you get this extraordinary situation where the Fairfax commanding the army is in a debate with soldiers who are levelers, i.e. who levelers believing, I mean, you could argue they're a sort of prototype of Marxists, arguing about universal suffrage in a church in London. But what's the other thing you'll say, like, what's extraordinary about those debates? It's not just the Putney debates, but there were endless other sort of sessions like them over that period, is that the debate from the army sort of veers from being we want more money to we're being charged too much by pubs for putting up our horses to we want love and brotherhood for all men and universal suffrage. So it's a completely sort of chaotic
Yeah,
time. And I think it's after Putney. Of course, the king escapes just after the Putney debates, which
yeah,
actually focuses within leads of the Second Civil War. But the what is I think it's that moment that actually makes Cromwell realize that he has got to rein this in.
Mm,
And so after the Second Civil War, you do get a much tighter reaction. And the mutiny, there's a couple of mutinies after the Second Civil War in which they do execute the ringleaders. But I think it does frighten him. I think Cromwell himself is in a little bit of a muddle about where he exactly stands. So I think there is part of his sort of religious motivation which makes him see the
mm,
argument for, if you like, for universal
yeah.
suffrage. But on the other hand, he knows that he doesn't really want it.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason actually it's a chaotic time is the thinking is quite chaotic.
Well,
And yeah, I'm sorry.
I
Yeah.
was going to say, in revolutionary moments, if you look at almost any revolutionary moment you care
Yeah.
to name, most of the key figures in the middle of it, are kind of laying down the
Mm.
train tracks in front of the locomotive, so to speak,
Yeah.
and reacting very quickly to facts on the ground, old assumptions being torn up, new ones having to be quickly written, and then people, whether it's Oliver Cromwell or Fidel Castro, thinking, well, where am I in
Mm.
all of this?
Yeah.
And what do I
Yeah.
think, honestly?
Yeah. I mean, totally. But again, I think what is one of the other, just staying on the new model, which is so interesting, is of course once Cromwell goes, and the army really lacks that sort of that Cromwellian grip. The man who arguably replaces him, Monk, who becomes Albemarle, and who then sides with the Stuarts, and obviously it facilitates the restoration with Parliament. That is, they've been genuinely frightened by how the army has gone. And people like Monk, who is a West Country squire, he actually started the civil wars as a royalist from them. They're determined to pull the army back in, as we said a few minutes ago, back into the being part of the political, obeying the political system. And what I find so totally fascinating is how the British Army's behaved since then. So within 25 years of the Restoration, there is an army which is based on new model army, still has quite a lot of people in it because people could serve much longer then. Not a lot, but a few who served in new model army who were fighting for a Catholic king, James II at Sedgemoor,
Mm.
against a Protestant usurper in form of Monmouth. That same army, 3 years later, then fights for William of Orange against James II. So here is that like Monk has completely fulfilled with a clarity of thinking, but arguably Cromwell lacked what armies are for.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I think the difficult thing to me about Cromwell is Ireland, because I cannot, for my life, me square how a man who professed such deep religious scruples could actually behave or allow his army to behave as they behaved in Ireland. And Cromwellian occupation of Ireland, campaign in Ireland, it still colours Anglo-Irish relations to this day.
Well, yeah.
And so there are huge questions about Cromwell and about his legacy, that Ireland's one, and then what we've just been talking about is another. Not denying the fact that actually he is, and Fairfax created this British Army we've got today.
Well, and I think this is the last thought because we're nearly out of time. But I think when you look at the rhetoric of dehumanization of Irish Catholics that had happened throughout the 1640s,
Yeah.
the idea that they were savages, all these stories about Irish atrocities against the Protestant planters and all these kinds of things. It's you can see why there are a large body of English troops that are capable of going to Ireland and committing such brutal and dreadful things
Yes and no. I mean, it's very interesting how reluctant British troops were to serve in Ireland. They hated it.
yeah.
And actually, arguably, that hasn't changed much over the years, because soldiers never really like being deployed amongst their own people. I'm not certain it doesn't go a bit deeper than that. I'm not certain it was I think that is a leadership issue.
Mhm.
I mean, the way soldiers behave is large responsibility of their officers.
Right.
And I think there was with Cromwell and Arden and with the other senior Cromwellians in Ireland. I think there was an absence of moral scruple.
Yeah.
And I find it very. I think about it a lot. I spend a lot of my life in Ireland. To me, it's one of the sort of completely sort of unanswered sort of questions of history. And whereas the Cromwellian army's done a huge sort of favor in terms of historical grounds by creating the British Army, it's also done a huge disfavor in terms of how it poisoned Ireland. But yeah. The other thing just actually on that, which just got me, sorry, we've got a bit another comment. Just going back to religion in armies. I mean, one of the things that interests me huge is just how motivating force that is. Because if you look at the army of Mehmet, the Conqueror, the Ottoman army, and it's always meant to be sort of fighting a jihad for Islam. Undoubtedly, Mehmet and his senior commanders are very devout Muslims. Quite how deep that sort of jihad spirit goes in his army is questionable, I think. I think it's also a question. Sorry,
I was going to say that this is the great a thing I think that is always overstated. I mean, when you look at the supposed fanaticism of the Japanese and their service to the emperor, or the racial beliefs of the Wehrmacht. Well, there's always someone peeling the potatoes, isn't there? I mean, there's always the jobbers, the guys who I was just obeying orders. I mean, the fanaticism, I suspect, is just the spear tip, and with lots of armies that you tend not to find that, because you tend not to find that amongst people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, totally.
We must finish in a moment, Barney. But
sorry,
there's so much more to say that I would, if you'd like to come back at some point and talk further.
I'd be delighted. I mean, I love these podcasts. I think what's so wonderful for somebody like me is the interest that history now. People say interest in history. And to me, armies are my life. And I had the opportunity to actually talk and develop the ideas of really what an army is and what armies will be in the future. I think they're going to be very different to what they are now. I'd be fascinated to do that. So thank you very much for having me. I need to give a book a bit of a plug.
Yeah, let's do the book. We've got 2 minutes.
Okay, so it's published by Osprey. So Bloomsbury. Osprey is a print of it's the military or the historical editions of Bloomsbury. It's called Nations in Arms. It comes out in a couple of weeks. You can pre-order it on Amazon now. It was also an audio. And I just thoroughly enjoyed writing it. And if people want to come back at me, and then I'm always delighted to hear from people. I always find one of the most interesting things about writing a book is what readers think of it. And you often find you learn so much from people's reaction to it. I'd be delighted to talk further to you or to anybody else. It's also published in the States. I can't remember what the American publication date is, but it's not far off the same time.
So, folks, as we always say, if you can buy it from an independent bookshop, please do.
Yeah, of course.
We need your help. If you can't get it from an independent bookshop, buy it direct from the publisher, because that's where your funds go to the people that really need them. Okay?
Brilliant.
So, Barney, it was a pleasure today, and I look forward to chatting again.
You're very kind to have me. I much enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Mervis Diamond Importers, this is Ronnie Mervis. Before you tie the knot, you should explore our Veragio engagement and wedding rings. The styles are out of this world with mind-blowing design options. Veragio is the only designer who allows you to personalize your ring exactly the way you want it. The sky is the limit. Each ring is crafted to the highest quality. When you pair your Veragio ring with the unmatched beauty of a world-famous Mervis diamond, you have a ring which is truly like no other. It will be the talk of the town. Your friends will be envious. Mervis means more diamonds, better quality, and the most value. And with easy Mervis financing, you can get her dream diamond now. Don't wait. To shop our mouth-watering Mervis diamonds and the largest selection of Veragio bridal jewelry in the tri-state area, visit us online at mervisdiamond.com or call 800-HER-LOVE. Again, that's mervisdiamond.com or 800-HER-LOVE. Mervis Diamond Importers, your official Veragio jeweler.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Hi, I'm Debbie Millman, and I host a podcast called Design Matters from the TED Audio Collective. Every episode, I have conversations with designers, writers, artists, and other luminaries of contemporary thought. People like Roman Mars, Ai Weiwei, Ethan Hawke, and Ashley Ford. We not only talk about their crafts, but how they design the arc of their lives, what they've learned, what obstacles they've overcome and how they've done it, and how they see the world. Join us for an inquiry into the broader world of creative culture. Find and follow Design Matters with Debbie Millman wherever you're listening to this.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.